Hey there, AP Hug team. This is Sanchez back with a mini lecture on the models of urban land use. Today we're going to be taking a look at three key theories and models. First, we're going to take a look at the concentric zone model. Secondly, we're going to look at the sector model. And then finally, we're going to look at the multiple nuclei model. Okay, so first let's go ahead and talk about the concentric zone theory. This zone model was created in the 1920s by sociologist E.W. Burgess, and it views cities as growing outward from a central area in a series of concentric rings, much like the growth ring of trees. You can even think back to our discussion of the von Thunen model, so that kind of circular ring activity. The size and the width of the rings vary from city to city, but Burgess believed that the model fit most of the cities of the time. What he really focused it on is different zones. So here's a visual on the screen. So if we're looking at the little rings, so again in the center, which would be the A, we have the CBD, which we read about in Key Issue 1 in Chapter 13. We have the zone of transition, the residential, lower class, residential middle class, and then residential upper class. Now again, just a little more background information before we dive into the zones. We're talking the time frame is roughly the 1920s. This is the time period where we're very class conscious. People are very aware, and housing tends to be very segregated. Now, just like many of our models that we've mentioned before, the von Thunen or central place theory, models, remember, they're not perfect. There's certain assumptions that we take into account. So some assumptions of the concentric zone theory. The older buildings in the city are center. The newer buildings are kind of along the edge or the perimeter. Strong economic and ethnic segregation, and low-income groups lack the transport and live closer to the city center. So those are some general assumptions about the concentric zone theory. All right, so a little bit about the center portion, so which will be Zone A. Or Zone 1, I should say. The innermost zone is the Central Business District. This is where non-residential activities are concentrated. Very few residents or homes actually exist in this ring, and the property costs are quite high. Now, the second ring that we see on this model would be Zone 2, or B on this particular one, which is the zone in transition. This contains light industry and housing for the poor, and serves as that transition zone between the businesses in the CBD and the more purely residential areas of the outer zones. Industries located in Zone 2 may be too large to fit into the relatively small Zone 1, or their owners may be actually seeking cheaper land because the property is so expensive in that CBD center ring. Houses may have been formerly occupied by the wealthy, who have moved farther out, leaving their homes to deteriorate. All right, zone number 3. Zone number 3 is actually going to contain the working class homes, more modest older houses on small lots occupied by stable working class families. Housing here is less expensive than the outer rings. Zone 4 gets a little further away from the CBD, so again, farther out on the rings. The homes get larger and they get more expensive. Zone 4 consists of the middle class residents. Either they're going to be single family homes or high rent apartments occupied by those wealthy enough to choose the location. You actually get to pick where you want to live and can afford the higher cost of transportation to the CBD. Finally, Zone 5, or Zone E in this particular model, is going to be a commuter zone for the final ring. It's obviously, again, farthest away from the CBD, and it's beyond the continuous buildup of the area or the city and the people that live in small villages where they spend their leisure and sleep hours, who actually might take transportation to try to commute into the CBD for work. Now, obviously, there's some issues with this particular model. So again, this is from the 1920s, so it is slightly dated. The model is dynamic and ever-changing as the inner rings grow larger or invaded spaces the rings. He explains the neighborhoods change through a process of invasion and succession, with succeeding poor inhabitants driving wealthier residents farther away from the city center. Um, but the zones are never as clear cut, the landscape isn't considered, and we're not even really taking into account the fact that automobiles and different transportation on industry. All right, the second model we're going to take a look at is the sector model. Now, the sector model, land economist Homer Hoyt developed the sector model in 1939 as a different interpretation, a different way to view the concentric zone theory. According to Hoyt, the city developed in a series of sectors, not rings. So again, you can look at the image of the screen. We're not talking about those round circular like we mentioned with the trees. We have these different kind of sections. The sectors may be determined by environmental factors. We think of hills, or you think of rivers or bodies of water, or they may simply just develop by chance. As the city grows, particular activities expand outward in a wedge-like sector from the center. Once a district has established for industry, other industries will cluster around it, creating this wedge-like structure. Likewise, a district where wealthier people live will attract wealthier people, so the sector becomes a concentration of their residents. Middle-class residents are adjacent to the high-income areas, and the low-income residents occupy kind of like the leftover space. Now, Hoyt's sectors are similar than Burgess's circles, but you can kind of see on the screen the overall pattern of the land use does not reflect the unbroken circles around the CBD, the Central Business District. Excuse me. Hoyt, like Burgess, notes that as the city grows, the residential areas once occupied by the wealthy kind of trickle or filter down to the middle class, and eventually the lower class as property is sold or rented from one owner to another. All right, and the last one we're going to take a look at for today in your textbook is the multiple nuclei model. This particular model, the concentric circle and the sector models kind of assume that urban growth and development outward from a single central business district, which had originally been the site for the first settlement. The multiple nuclei model, developed in 1945 by geographers C.D. Harris and E.L. Uman, counters that large cities develop from spreading from several nodes of growth, not just one. All right, so you can see on the map right here, if we're using the key, you can see the CBD, which is featured in the blue. Now, individual nodes usually have a special functions. Think of it like the ports or the neighborhood business, the universities, the airports, and different levels of residence. Now, this model kind of explains that incompatible land use activities do not cluster in the same locations. So the nodes influence the type of development that occurs around them. Now, the clusters kind of expand as the city grows, and when the clusters come into contact, incompatible land uses develop along the lines of the juncture. Now, the three models help to explain not only land use in cities, but also the different social characteristics of people that live in a particular area of the city. These models may be used along with census information to describe individual neighborhoods. Urban areas in the United States are divided into census tracts, areas of approximately, we say, around 5,000 people that correspond whenever possible to the neighborhoods and boundaries. Every 10 years, the U.S. Census Bureau publishes demographic characteristics for each tract, including ethnicity, race, income, and educational levels of residence. All right, folks, so that was just a brief overview of our three urban models. I want to remind you on the screen right now in the haiku page, I've also posted this PowerPoint presentation, Sanchez Urban Geography. So feel free to go through that, take a look. There's some more pictures and additional resources. All right, folks, I'll see you in class.